The final destination. When most people think about life after death, they imagine a single, eternal destination. The popular belief is that when a righteous person dies, their soul leaves the physical world and travels to a place called heaven. In everyday conversation, the terms heaven, paradise, and the new earth are used as if they are completely interchangeable. They are treated as different names for the exact same spiritual reality. But a careful investigation of the biblical manuscripts reveals a surprising contradiction. The ancient writers did not use these words as simple synonyms. Instead, they used them to describe distinct realms, different periods of time, and entirely separate phases of the afterlife. So what is the difference between paradise, heaven, and the new earth? And what do these texts actually say about the ultimate destiny of humanity? To answer this question, we must first examine the concept of paradise. Today, paradise is often understood as the final resting place of the soul. But the origins of the word tell a very different story. The term does not actually come from Hebrew or Greek. It is a loanword from ancient Persian. In the Persian language, the word referred to a royal, enclosed garden. It was a walled park, a place of safety, beauty, and immense privilege, usually reserved for a king. When Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek in the 3rd century before Christ, they needed a word to describe the Garden of Eden. They chose that Persian term. Because of this translation, paradise originally referred to a physical place on earth in the distant past. It was the lost garden, the original sanctuary where humanity walked with the divine before the introduction of death. But as centuries passed, the concept evolved. During the period between the Old and New Testaments, Jewish thinkers began to use the word paradise not just for the ancient past, but for the future. They started to believe that the lost garden had been hidden away or preserved by God. By the 1st century, paradise had come to mean the temporary resting place for the righteous dead. It was seen as a place of comfort and waiting, an intermediate state between physical death and the final judgment. This historical context completely changes how we read one of the most famous passages in the New Testament. While being crucified, Jesus speaks to the thief hanging next to him. He says, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." For many readers, this statement is absolute proof that believers go directly to heaven when they die. But early Christians understood this differently. According to traditional Christian theology, Jesus did not ascend to the highest heaven on the day he died. The texts indicate that his physical resurrection happened 3 days later. Therefore, the paradise he promised to the thief was not the final, eternal state of glory. It was the realm of the righteous dead, a place of peace and conscious existence, where the soul waits for the future resurrection of the body. Paradise, in this sense, is an intermediate state. It is not the end of the story. This brings us to the second term in our investigation. If paradise is a place of waiting, what exactly is heaven? In the ancient biblical worldview, heaven was not primarily thought of as the future home of human beings. Heaven was understood as the immediate dwelling place of God. It is the unseen spiritual dimension that exists parallel to our physical reality. The ancient Hebrew mind viewed the cosmos as a multi-layered structure. There was the first heaven, which was simply the sky where the birds fly and the clouds form. Then there was the second heaven, the realm of the sun, the moon and the stars. Finally, there was the third heaven, the invisible domain of divine presence and spiritual beings. When the Apostle Paul wrote about a visionary experience, he described being caught up to the third heaven. But here is the detail that is so often overlooked. Throughout the vast majority of the biblical text, heaven is described as God's space, while earth is described as human space. The early Christian hope was not about abandoning the physical world to live forever as disembodied spirits in the clouds. The ultimate promise was something far more dramatic. The early texts suggest that the separation between heaven and earth is not permanent. While a soul may temporarily enter the presence of God after death, the biblical narrative does not end in the heavenly realm. It points toward a future event where heaven and earth are finally brought together. To understand this ultimate destiny, we must examine the final chapters of the book of Revelation, where the true nature of the new earth is unveiled. Continuo para approxima part 2. The early Christian understanding of the afterlife cannot be fully grasped without looking at the cultural world in which the New Testament was written. In the first century, the Mediterranean world was heavily influenced by ancient Greek philosophy. One of the most dominant ideas came from the followers of Plato. For these philosophers, the physical world was deeply flawed, a temporary prison for the immortal human soul. They believed that death was a release. The ultimate goal of human existence was to escape the physical body forever and exist purely as a spiritual entity in a higher, non-material realm. Over the centuries, this Greek philosophical concept slowly blended with Christian theology. Today, when many people speak of going to heaven, they are actually describing a Greek view of the afterlife rather than a strictly biblical one. The popular image of a soul floating eternally on clouds, free from the burden of physical matter, sounds deeply spiritual, but it directly contradicts the Jewish foundation of the earliest Christian teachings. For the ancient Hebrews, the physical world was not a mistake to be abandoned. It was a divine creation that God had declared to be entirely good. To see how this distinction plays out in the biblical text, we can look at a fascinating scene in the 6th chapter of the book of Revelation. The text describes a vision of the souls of the martyrs, those who had been killed for their faith. John sees these souls in heaven, specifically resting under the heavenly altar. This passage provides one of the clearest glimpses into what scholars call the intermediate state. These souls are in the presence of God. They are conscious. They are safe. But they are not entirely satisfied. The text records them crying out with a loud voice, asking a very specific question. They ask God, "How long will it be before you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" They are given white robes and told to rest a little longer. This detail is incredibly significant. If entering the heavenly realm as a disembodied spirit was the final, perfect goal of existence, these souls would have no reason to ask how long. Their waiting implies that heaven, in its current state, is not the end of the journey. They are waiting for a future resolution that involves the physical earth. The letters of the Apostle Paul provide another layer of complementary evidence. In his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul compares the current physical body to an earthly tent. He acknowledges that this tent will eventually be destroyed by death. But Paul does not say that his ultimate desire is to exist as a formless spirit. In fact, he explicitly states that he does not want to be found naked, a term used in the ancient world to describe a soul without a body. Instead, Paul writes that he longs to be clothed with a permanent heavenly dwelling. What Paul is describing is the promise of bodily resurrection. In the early Christian worldview, death temporarily separates the soul from the body. The soul may rest in paradise or the presence of God in heaven, but it remains in a state of anticipation. The ultimate hope was never an escape from physicality. It was the restoration and transformation of the physical body. Early Christians believed that just as Jesus was physically resurrected with a body that could eat, speak, and be touched, they too would receive incorruptible physical bodies at the end of the age. This brings us face to face with a theological problem that troubled many later interpreters. If humanity is ultimately destined to have physical bodies, they must have a physical place to live. A physical body cannot inhabit a purely non-material realm. The resurrected humanity requires a resurrected world. This is why the concepts of paradise and the present heaven are incomplete without the final element of the biblical promise. The temporary rest of the soul is merely a prelude to a much larger cosmic renewal, an event that the texts describe in vivid, earth-shaking detail. Continuo para approxima parte tres. The ultimate resolution to this mystery is found in the 21st chapter of the book of Revelation. For centuries, readers have turned to these final pages, expecting a description of human souls, leaving the earth to live forever in the sky. But the ancient text actually describes the exact opposite. The writer, John, states that he saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And then he witnesses something that contradicts almost every popular assumption about the afterlife. John sees the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. A loud voice from the throne declares that the dwelling place of God is now with humanity. According to this text, the ultimate goal of the Christian narrative is not the evacuation of earth. It is the colonization of earth by heaven. The two realms, which were separated by rebellion and death, are finally merged together into a single, restored reality. This detail forces us to reconsider what the phrase "passed away" actually means. Some interpreters argue that God will completely annihilate the current universe and create a brand new one from nothing. However, many biblical scholars point to the original Greek wording and the broader context of ancient Jewish thought. They argue that "passed away" implies a profound transformation, like a purifying fire that burns away corruption, rather than complete destruction. Just as the human body is resurrected and transformed, the physical earth itself will be resurrected and cleansed. This brings us to a fascinating full circle in our investigation. Remember how paradise originally meant a physical garden, a perfect environment on earth. In the 22nd chapter of Revelation, as John describes the new earth, he mentions a river of the water of life flowing through the city. And growing on either side of that river is the tree of life. This is not a coincidence. The tree of life has not been mentioned in the biblical narrative since the book of Genesis. Its reappearance here indicates that the new earth is the restoration and the massive expansion of the original paradise. So, how do different traditions interpret this cosmic conclusion? Popular culture and many modern believers continue to use the word heaven as a catch-all term for the final destination. They often view the architectural descriptions of the New Jerusalem purely as spiritual metaphors for a non-material existence. The text describes massive walls, gates made of pearl, and foundations adorned with precious stones. While these images carry deep symbolic meaning, they also reinforce the idea of a solid, tangible environment. Early church traditions, and many contemporary theologians, argue for a much more literal and physical restoration. They suggest that the new earth will be a real place, a redeemed society where resurrected humanity will live, work, create, and govern alongside God. What the evidence strongly supports is that the biblical authors did not view paradise, heaven, and the new earth as the exact same thing. By looking at the original texts in their historical context, a clear sequence emerges. Paradise, in its current form, is the peaceful, intermediate state where the souls of the righteous wait. Heaven is the present, invisible dimension where God dwells and where those resting souls are held. And the new earth is the final phase. It is the future physical world, permanently joined with heaven after the resurrection of the dead. This distinction completely changes how we understand the early Christian view of the future. It suggests that physical matter is not inherently evil. It is not a prison destined to be abandoned. Instead, it is something meant to be redeemed and elevated. The ultimate promise presented in these ancient manuscripts is not an escape from creation, but the healing of the entire cosmos. Yet, this understanding opens the door to another profound historical mystery. If the righteous are currently waiting in an intermediate state, and if they will eventually receive physical bodies for the new earth, what actually happens on the day of the resurrection? The early Christians believed this physical transformation would be sudden, visible, and tied directly to the final judgment. But exactly how this event was supposed to unfold, and what kind of bodies people would possess, became one of the most intensely debated topics in ancient theology. If you would like our next investigation to examine what early Christians actually believed about the resurrection of the dead, leave the word resurrection in the comments.